the hunter who couldn't pull the trigger, and the bear who never forgot. The forest was silent that morning, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made every breath feel too loud. Frost clung to the pines, and the air was sharp, cutting into the lungs of Henry, a hunter who had walked these woods for over 50 years. His boots sank into the frozen earth with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He knew the patterns of deer, the trails of elk, and the whispers of predators hidden just beyond sight. But this day felt different. Henry's hands gripped the rifle he'd carried for decades, a weapon polished by time, its wooden stock worn smooth by years of use. He had come searching for food, for game to fill the empty smokehouse back home. The winter had been cruel, and the village counted on men like him to provide. Then, through the misty breath of the forest, he saw it. A bear. It stood across a clearing, massive and wild, its fur matted with snow and streaked with mud. But this was no ordinary bear. Its frame was gaunt, ribs pressing through skin, eyes dull yet burning with hunger. Henry's hunter's instinct took over. He raised his rifle, breath steady, finger brushing the trigger. The bear lifted its head, locking eyes with him. For a long moment, man and beast stared into each other's souls. Henry saw no rage in the animal, no threat, only exhaustion, the hollow look of a creature fighting to survive. It huffed a cloud of white breath, swaying slightly, too weak even to charge. Henry's heart pounded. This was the perfect shot. Clean. Easy. He could end the suffering, or secure a victory that would bring respect from his village. But something inside him shifted. The rifle trembled in his hands. He saw not a monster, not prey, but a creature on the edge of life, clinging to the same fragile thread he himself often felt in the quiet hours of the night. His finger slipped from the trigger. Slowly, painfully, Henry lowered the rifle. The bear blinked, as if stunned. It stood for a moment longer, then turned, not in panic, but in weary dignity, and lumbered back into the shadows of the trees. Henry was left alone in the clearing, the weight of his choice heavier than the rifle in his hands. And though he didn't know it yet, that single act of mercy would return to him years later, in a way he could never have imagined. Henry trudged back to the village that evening with nothing to show for his hunt. His pack was empty, his rifle still loaded, and his neighbors raised their brows as he passed. "Nothing today?" one of them asked, half joking, half critical. Henry forced a thin smile. The woods were quiet. But inside, his mind replayed that moment, the bear's hollow eyes, the silence between them, and the choice he had made. He didn't tell anyone. To spare a predator was to invite whispers of weakness. Mercy, after all, did not feed hungry mouths. Yet Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater had happened in that forest. Days turned into weeks, and the season grew harsher. The villagers fought the bitter cold, rationing what little food they had. Henry himself often went without, giving his share to the younger families. Still, his thoughts often drifted to the bear he had let live. Had it survived the winter? Or had he simply left it to suffer longer? Then one spring morning, as the snow melted into rushing streams, Henry wandered back to that same clearing. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. There, by the river's edge, he saw movement. It was the bear. But not as before. Its fur was thicker, darker now, its body filled out with new strength. The hollowness in its eyes was gone, replaced with a steady calm. It drank from the stream, water dripping from its muzzle like liquid crystal in the sunlight. Henry froze, heart hammering. The bear lifted its head, and for a fleeting instant, its gaze found him again. No growl. No charge. Only recognition. Henry stood still, his breath shallow. The bear blinked slowly, almost deliberately, before turning back to the river, unbothered by his presence. It was a strange, fragile peace. A silent acknowledgement between man and beast. Henry felt his throat tighten. He had spared a life. And now, against all odds, he was witnessing the result. For the first time in years, Henry felt a warmth he hadn't known since his youth, a reminder that perhaps the world still had space for grace, even in the heart of the wild. What he didn't know then was that this fragile thread of mercy had tied his fate to the bears in ways neither of them could escape. And one day, it would come back to him when he needed it most. The years drifted by, carried on the turning of the seasons. Henry grew older, slower, his once steady hands beginning to tremble with age. His hunts yielded less, his strength waned, and though he tried to hide it, the village noticed. He often found himself wandering back to the river clearing where he had spared the bear. At first, it was curiosity, a desire to see if the creature still roamed those woods. Later, it became something else entirely. Regret. Henry would stand beneath the canopy of pines, staring at the rushing water, his reflection fractured in its surface. He thought of all the choices he had made in life, the times he had chosen silence over kindness, distance over closeness, the hunt over the hearth. The loneliness pressed harder on him now, heavy as the snow in winter. Sometimes, he whispered into the woods, "I wonder if you still remember me." But the forest never answered. The bear itself was rarely seen. Once, in the fading light of autumn, Henry caught a glimpse of it across a meadow. Its massive shoulders shifted like mountains as it lumbered toward the trees. For a heartbeat, the bear paused, lifting its head as though it had sensed his presence. Henry's chest tightened. He wanted to call out, to bridge the impossible gulf between man and beast. But he didn't. Instead, he watched in silence as the animal disappeared into the shadows, leaving him with nothing but the echo of his own longing. The villagers whispered about Henry too. "Age has softened him," they said. "He hunts less, speaks less. Sometimes I think he's losing himself." They didn't know the truth. It wasn't weakness. It was regret. Regret for a life spent taking, when once, just once, he had chosen to give. And though he tried to bury the memory, he knew deep down that his story with the bear was far from over. Fate had a way of circling back, just as the seasons did. The storm came without warning. By evening, the sky had blackened, clouds swelling like bruises over the valley. The wind tore through the trees, bending their trunks until they creaked like bones under pressure. Henry, stubborn as always, had ventured too far from the village in search of firewood, ignoring the whispers of thunder in the distance. The first crack of lightning split the sky, and then the heavens opened. Rain fell in torrents, blinding, freezing, pounding against his frail body. He tried to hurry back, but the forest floor had turned to mud. His boots slipped. His lantern sputtered and died. And then came the fall. One careless step on a slick stone sent Henry tumbling down a shallow embankment. His body slammed against the earth, and he cried out as pain exploded in his leg. When he tried to move, he felt the sharp, unmistakable stab of a broken bone. Panic gripped him. He was alone. The storm raged louder. His shouts were swallowed by the howling wind. Hours seemed to crawl by. Soaked, shivering, his strength began to fade. Images from his past flickered in his mind, hunts long gone, faces long buried, choices made and unmade. The forest pressed in around him like a living thing, watching, waiting. And then footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Deliberate. Henry froze, his breath caught in his throat. At first, he thought it might be wolves, hungry and drawn by the scent of his blood. His hand fumbled for the knife at his belt, though he knew it would do little good. But what emerged from the shadows was no wolf. A hulking shape loomed at the edge of the clearing. Its silhouette was unmistakable, broad shoulders, thick fur, the sway of a powerful head. A bear. Lightning illuminated the beast for a single, fleeting second. Henry's heart nearly stopped. It was him. The same bear. The one he had spared all those years ago. For a moment, man and beast stared at one another through the sheets of rain, bound again by the same silent tether that had first stayed Henry's hand. The storm howled around them. But in the quiet space between thunderclaps, Henry realized something. He was not alone anymore. The storm raged on, but Henry's world had narrowed to the massive shadow before him. The bear stood still, rain streaming down its thick coat, eyes reflecting the flicker of lightning. Henry's breath came in ragged gasps, half from the pain in his broken leg, half from the disbelief of what he was seeing. The same animal he had spared so many years ago had returned. For a long moment, Henry expected it to vanish back into the forest, leaving him broken and helpless. Instead, the beast stepped forward. Its paws sank into the mud with a weighty grace, the ground trembling slightly with each step. Henry's instinct screamed at him to shrink back, to protect himself. Yet his body refused to move. He could only watch. The bear lowered its head, sniffing the air. The scent of blood and fear hung heavy between them. But there was no malice in its gaze. No hunger. Instead, there was something else, something Henry couldn't quite name. Recognition? Curiosity? Or perhaps, memory. Another flash of lightning split the sky, and for an instant, Henry saw the beast's face as clear as if it were carved from the storm itself. Scars traced its muzzle. Its eyes, though wild, held a strange calm. Then, in one astonishing motion, the bear did the unthinkable. It pressed its massive body close, nudging Henry's arm with the gentlest of touches, as though urging him to hold on. When Henry, trembling, reached out, his fingers brushed against sodden fur. Warmth. Life. A presence that dwarfed the storm itself. The bear let out a low, resonant huff, and then slowly began to shift its body in such a way that Henry understood it wanted him to climb. It was offering him help. Henry blinked against the rain, tears mingling with the storm water on his cheeks. This wasn't chance. This wasn't instinct alone. This was something else. A debt remembered. A bond that had never broken. With every ounce of strength he had left, Henry dragged himself upward, clinging to the thick, rain-soaked fur. His body screamed with pain, but he held on. The bear carried him. Step by step. Out of the mud. Away from the darkness. Toward the flickering lights of the distant village. And as thunder rolled above, Henry realized the truth that stole his breath. The life he had once spared was now sparing his own. By the time the storm had loosened its grip on the valley, Henry could barely hold on. His body sagged against the bear's broad back, every breath shallow, every heartbeat a painful echo in his chest. But the beast never faltered. It trudged through the mud, through swollen streams, through broken branches and wind-swept darkness, as though driven by something far greater than instinct. Step after step, it bore him onward, until at last the faint glow of lanterns appeared through the trees. The village. Henry's head swam, his vision blurred. He thought he heard voices, distant shouts, gasps of disbelief, but the world tilted before he could make sense of them. Strong hands lifted him down, hurried words of comfort reached his ears. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the silhouette of the bear, standing at the forest's edge watching. Watching, and waiting. When Henry awoke days later, swaddled in warmth, the villagers told him the tale. They had seen the great bear emerge from the storm, carrying him like a child. They had seen it set him down with a gentleness that no one could explain. And then, before fear could rise or arrows could fly, it had vanished into the trees once more. To some, it was a miracle. To others, a legend already taking root. But Henry knew the truth. It wasn't chance. It wasn't a trick of nature. It was a debt repaid. Weeks passed, his body healing slowly, but his mind sharper than ever. Often, he found himself standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the shadows, listening for the sound of heavy paws on the earth. He never saw the bear again. Not fully. Sometimes, on the still nights, he swore he caught the glint of eyes between the trees, a shape that lingered just long enough to remind him. And strangely, he felt no sadness in that distance. Only peace. Because Henry had learned a truth that few ever dared believe. Some debts are never forgotten. Some bonds are never broken. And sometimes, the wild remembers more than we ever give it credit for.